Chapter 11. The Global Impact of the 1849 Rush. 1. The Massive Migration, Statistics and Demographic Shifts. The year 1849 marked a rupture in the global demographic fabric. What had been a localized scramble in 1848 transformed into a colossal multi-continental stampede, known to history as the Great Migration of the 49ers. In the span of a single year, California's non-native population skyrocketed from a roughly 14,000 to nearly 100,000. This was not a slow, steady colonization, but a violent, frantic inundation. From the cobblestone streets of London and the revolutionary barricades of Paris to the tea-houses of Canton and the dusty plains of Missouri, a singular obsessive destination unified the disparate peoples of the earth: the Golden Gate. The statistics of this migration are staggering and speak to a world suddenly unmoored. Approximately 40,000 seekers arrived by sea, braving the treacherous storm-lashed waters of Cape Horn or the fever-ridden jungles of the Isthmus of Panama. Another 30,000 to 40,000 trudged across the vast North American interior, following the Overland Trail, a 2,000-mile gauntlet of cholera, alkaline dust, and exhaustion. This was the first truly global event of the industrial age. It was a movement of the young, the desperate, and the ambitious. Statistics from the era show that over 90% of the arrivals were men under the age of 40, creating a unique, hyper-masculine society where traditional family structures were momentarily replaced by the company of the mining claim. The demographic shift was not merely numerical, but profoundly ethnic. The 1849 rush turned California into a linguistic and cultural mosaic. Within months, San Francisco boasted French quarters, Chinese laundries, and Chilean markets. This influx was a brain drain for the rest of the world. Europe lost its most restless young revolutionaries, and the American East lost its most skilled artisans. However, for California, it was a demographic jackpot. The arrival of these 49ers provided the human capital, lawyers, engineers, merchants, and laborers that allowed the territory to bypass the typical decades of frontier development. In less than 2 years, California leapfrogged from a neglected Mexican province to a fully realized American state, proving that gold has the power to compress centuries of history into a few feverish months. 2. Technological progress in hydraulic and placer mining. As the mid-1850s approached, the easy gold was largely exhausted, the loose flakes resting in the riverbeds and surface soils, exhausted by the frantic pans and cradles of the 49ers. The remaining wealth was locked deep within ancient subterranean river channels and buried under hundreds of feet of compacted gravel and clay. To reach this deep treasure, the miners had to abandon the individual shuckle and turn toward the brutal efficiency of industrial engineering. This necessity birthed hydraulic mining, a revolutionary and devastating technique that transformed the Sierra Nevada foothills into a theater of technological war. The heart of this new technology was the monitor, or giant, a massive articulated iron nozzle that could project a high-pressure stream of water with the force of a cannon. By diverting mountain streams into miles of wooden flumes and iron pipes, miners harnessed the power of gravity to create immense hydraulic pressure. These giants were turned against the hillsides, literally liquefying entire mountains. The water dissolved the earth, sending a slurry of mud, gravel, and gold through massive miles-long sluice boxes. This was placer mining on a titanic scale. It was no longer a human endeavor of luck, but a mechanical process of mass extraction that required enormous capital, sophisticated plumbing, and a total disregard for the landscape. The technological progress, however, came with a catastrophic environmental price. The hydraulic monitors did not just extract gold, they unleashed millions of tons of slickens, a thick, suffocating sludge of debris, into the river systems of the Sacramento Valley. These tailings choked the rivers, raised the waterbeds, and caused unprecedented flooding in the farmlands below. This era marked the birth of the first major legal conflict between industrial mining and agriculture. The technology was so effective that it eventually led to the Woodruff versus North Bloomfield decision in 1884, the first environmental injunction in American history. The hydraulic era proved that while gold could build a state, the technology required to extract it could simultaneously destroy the very land that provided the wealth. 3. Economic shockwaves, effects on world market prices and interest. The arrival of California's gold in the world's financial capitals was not a gentle stream, but a tidal wave that threatened to drown the existing monetary order. Between 1848 and 1858, the world's gold supply increased more than it had in the previous 3 centuries combined. As the massive shipments of dust and bars reached the vaults of the Bank of England and the Mint of Paris, the fundamental laws of supply and demand triggered a global economic realignment. The most immediate shockwave was the depreciation of gold relative to silver. For the first time in generations, the value of the Yellow King faltered, causing a panic among creditors who feared their long-term loans would be repaid in a cheapened currency. This sudden abundance of gold acted as a massive global stimulus, fueling a decade of unprecedented inflation and industrial expansion. As the money supply swelled, prices for commodities, wheat, iron, and textiles skyrocketed across Europe and America. This was the golden inflation of the mid-19th century. While it burdened those on fixed incomes, it was a boon for the emerging industrialist and the debtor class. Furthermore, the influx of gold led to a dramatic drop in interest rates. With banks overflowing with bullion, capital became cheap, allowing for the financing of gargantuan projects. The transcontinental railroads of America, the telegraph cables beneath the Atlantic, and the massive steamships that would soon shrink the world. California gold effectively saved the global economy from a stifling silver shortage that had plagued the early 1800s. However, it also forced a radical change in national policies. Faced with the devaluing of gold, countries like the Netherlands briefly demonetized it in favor of silver, while France struggled to maintain its bimetallic ratio. Ultimately, these economic shockwaves settled into a new equilibrium that paved the way for the classical gold standard. The California discovery proved that the standard of value was not a static divine constant, but a living force susceptible to the whims of a carpenter's find in a distant wilderness. The world had become smaller, faster, and significantly wealthier, but at the cost of a permanent structural instability in the value of money itself. 4. Cultural exchange and conflict in the wilderness. The California gold fields were a sprawling, lawless laboratory of human interaction, where the world's cultures collided with a violence and intensity never before seen in the 19th century. In the diggings, the ancient barriers of geography were momentarily erased, replaced by a dense, breathing mosaic of humanity. On a single sandbar of the American River, one could hear the rhythmic chanting of Chinese miners as they moved boulders, the spirited guitars of Chilean and Mexican veterans in the evening camps, and the boisterous polyglot shouts of European refugees who had fled the failed revolutions of 1848. This was a cultural exchange forced by greed, where the exchange of mining techniques, culinary habits, and linguistic slang created a new, distinctively California identity: rugged, impatient, and profoundly skeptical of tradition. However, beneath this veneer of cosmopolitan curiosity lay a dark and bloody reality. The Golden Dream was a nightmare for the indigenous California Indians. For millennia, the Sacramento and San Joaquin valleys had sustained tribes like the Nisenan and Maidu. The arrival of the gold seekers was not a migration to them, but a biological and territorial apocalypse. The miners viewed the native peoples either as obstacles to be removed or as a source of exploited labor. The delicate ecosystems of the rivers, once rich with salmon and acorns, were poisoned by mercury and choked by silt.
This period saw a catastrophic decline in the indigenous population, driven by displacement, starvation, and state-sanctioned violence that many historians now categorize as a systematic genocide. The conflict was not limited to the native population. It manifested as a bitter xenophobia among the fortune hunters themselves. As the easy gold diminished, the American-born miners began to view foreign expertise as a threat. The introduction of the foreign miners' tax of 1850, which targeted Chinese and Spanish-speaking miners, was the legal manifestation of a growing racial arrogance. Violent expulsion movements became common, where French, Mexican, and Chinese camps were burned to the ground by mobs of nativists. This wilderness conflict proved that while gold could draw the world together, it could not automatically harmonize the prejudices they brought with them. The golden wilderness became a mirror of the world's greatest virtues: enterprise, resilience, and ingenuity, but also its most endearing vices: greed and the violent exclusion of the other.
5. Long-term colonization in the birth of a new West. By the late 1850s, the feverish delirium of the individual gold seeker began to cool, replaced by the permanent stone and mortar reality of a new civilization. The rush had acted as a violent, high-pressure catalyst that compressed a century's worth of colonial development into a single decade. As the riverbeds were picked clean of their surface flakes, thousands of men who had arrived as temporary adventurers realized they could never return to their old lives. The miner who had failed to find his pile in the mud looked to the soil and the sea. The pickaxe was beaten into a plowshare, and the tents of the mining camps evolved into the permanent towns of the motherlode. This was the true birth of the American West, not as a slow frontier expansion, but as a sudden, urbanized, and technologically advanced society. The transformation of San Francisco was the most vivid testament to this long-term colonization. In just 10 years, it evolved from a desolate cove of abandoned ships into the Constantinople of the West. The gold that had once been gambled away in canvas tents was now funding the construction of grand opera houses, sophisticated banking institutions, and the foundations of the University of California. The wealth from the mines flowed into the development of the Central Valley's agriculture, turning California into a global breadbasket. The need to transport gold and people triggered the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, forever stitching the Pacific coast to the heart of the American Republic. The wilderness had been tamed not by the slow tread of the pioneer, but by the frantic, golden pulse of capital. Ultimately, the 1849 rush established a new template for Western success. It created a culture of risk-taking, innovation, and radical individualism that would define the Pacific Slope for generations. While the gold itself eventually became an industrial commodity managed by large corporations, the 49er spirit remained embedded in the social DNA of the region. California provided the metallic backbone for the Union during the American Civil War, its steady stream of bullion ensuring that the North's credit remained unshakable. The rush was over, but the new West it birthed was now a global power, a shimmering, restless empire built on the bedrock of a carpenter's accidental find.